We are the Story Dad, and
Yep.
today we're tackling one of the flagship princess movies.
Yeah.
You want to talk about the idea of what are the princess movies, Eric?
Well, because we were talking about okay, we got to get some a princess movie in because that's one of the big staples of the Disney canon, and we were going through which ones we could do, and I feel like there's only three genuine princess movies. There's lots of Disney princesses in lots of different things, but the princess movie of someone becoming a princess or the journey to become that or learning what it means to be a princess or all that as that's the whole plot of the movie. There was three main ones we could think of. There was Sleeping Beauty, Snow White, and Cinderella was the main ones we could think of. You could kind of put Little Mermaid in there, but it's got its own kind of thing with it too.
Well, and so that's the delineation you're talking about, is the difference between a princess movie versus a movie that has a princess in it. And
Aladdin, Princess Jasmine's a princess, but it's not a princess movie. It's not, she's not even the main character, right?
Yeah. And then Maui self-referentially calls Moana a princess to kind of make fun of the idea of the Disney princess. And she's like, I'm not one. And he's like, you've got an animal companion and you're clearly a princess. Right. And which is great because and we can talk about the animal companions. I think we did a little bit in the Moana episode, but and so one of the things, and so Tangled, I think, is half in, half out of this.
Right.
Genre, if we're going to call it a genre. But it's the denouement is becoming a princess, and not just becoming a princess, but becoming a princess by way of marriage.
Right.
And so when I was growing up, to set context for because I grew up in the 80s in Eugene, Oregon, which is in Lane County, which is way before all y'all were woke. We were already walking the walk and woken the woke. And all of my friends' parents hated the Disney princess movies.
Oh, interesting.
And so interestingly, I was always well, at least their names. None of these princes have names. There's such they're not even characters. They're
right.
You want to talk about objects?
The idea that the prince is revered, he's barely in it.
He's barely in it. He's a means to an end. So I always thought that was interesting. It's you can dress up as a Disney princess and people know who you are. You dress up as a Disney prince. Well, first, there aren't any. And second, no one will know who you are. So, So all that is to say, I grew up sort of surrounded by this cloud of villainy around these princess movies. And I think we kind of narrowed them, the archetypal ones are Snow White, the first Disney film, the first animated feature film ever. Cinderella, and Sleeping Beauty. And I think chronologically that's the order that they came into the world. And not that they were the first, second, and third Disney movies, but they were the first, second, and third princess movies that they came out in that order. How about you? How did you grow up? What is your impression of
I remember being little.
Genre?
Well, I don't know if it's so much princess genre. I remember being little and watching this. I'm okay, it's a girls movie, because it's the girls thing, but then there's all the animal companions. I'm that's the part they threw in there for the dudes. And this is what my 4-year-old brain was thinking, right? Because I don't know, that's always kind of how I viewed it. Because, there's some fun stuff and quirky stuff that was, very animated, playful animal stuff going on. But I don't remember having thinking of it as the statement about women or men or anything. It was just I don't know, the princess story. My sister really was into princess stories, and everyone know and they still see it with our friends' kids. Girls are into dressing up as princesses. It was a thing, right? And I was okay. I never had any positive or negative feelings towards it or whatever.
We definitely had them on. I grew up in a house with two. It was me and my brother, and my dad, who worked graveyard shift, was asleep all the time, and then my mom, who also worked. So we kind of grew up with a lot of movies, and and we had them on, and they weren't our favorites. They were too like, pretty masculine, interested little boys, and but we wouldn't have turned them off. Like, we did like them, and we did watch them. They were in the rotation, VHS back then.
Yeah.
And my mom, to this day, one of her favorite movies is Sleeping Beauty, which is not what we're talking about. I'm looking forward to talking about that one.
Yeah.
So Cinderella, one of the princess movies. And so one of the things that I was hoping to talk about with this is that I think they've gotten short shrift in analysis, in sort of I think they've been overlooked for their depth. And I also think what I'd like to connect it to is I remember a conversation about archetypal stories, about the hero's journey, and about this was between, I think it was Jordan Peterson, and he was in this particular episode, he was talking to Heather Heying, and they were talking about like the what female hero's journey archetypes are there.
Yeah.
And I think Heather, if I can recall the discussion, is that she was sort of hearkening like, obviously we need some new ones. And Dr. Peterson had one that he could proffer because he's not interested in making new ones. And I think the hazards of making new ones are evident in sort of like the whole modernist and postmodern attempts to like, let's generate a new mythology, and then it doesn't work. So what I have seen, and something that I would like to prefer or proffer, is even that I think has existed, it hasn't been spotted. So Beauty and the Beast is a great one. We've talked a little bit about sort of like the naive adventurer as a feminine hero's journey. That is very similar to the male hero's journey. It's just for some reason it's that like naivete and that colliding with sort of a masculine roughhouse kind of world.
Right.
But the Cinderella story is what I would want to call the Divine Bride.
Right.
And so that's the sort of the angle that I'd like to approach.
Definitely.
Very, Judeo-Christian, very like, in its origin. But then you had also, which I think is interesting, you had a take on it that I'd love to hear about, because the complaints that I heard growing up about princess movies is that they were irrelevant. They were putting narratives onto women that were no longer justifiable, no longer of interest to women.
Right.
Put women in this sort of box of expectation, and then you have a really
so what you're getting at, I was rewatching Cinderella, and this idea in my mind of like, okay, like the story's kind of been put in a box, women aren't like, people aren't really interested in like this type of story anymore. And I was watching it, two of the most popular like stories and franchises for women like jumped off the screen to me. So my take was Act 1 of this movie is one of the biggest musicals that's on Broadway right now, one of the biggest movies from the last 10 years ago, like Mean Girls, right? It's her getting shit from her stepsisters, the whole thing, and being bullied and pushed around, even though like she is better and more competent than they are. And there's a mean vibe to it. And people love watching that story. People are telling that story in a lot of different ways now. And then the second act is The Frickin' Bachelor, which is one of the most popular shows amongst women. It's literally they all show up to the ball. There's the Bachelor there standing there. They're having, if anyone's watched The Bachelor, like the cocktail party in the first episode where they all meet him and he goes off with one of them and has a conversation. That's what happens in Cinderella. And, one of them tries to win him over, and then they all, fight over the guy, and drama ensues. And that's the second act. That's the second and third act of Cinderella.
So let's like dig into the Mean Girls aspect, because there's so much there. And, so Cinderella has this wonderful, blissful home life.
Yeah.
In the original Grimm's fairy tale, like, you know, her mom is this like wonderful pious woman, and then she becomes gravely ill. And we kind of skip over that in the Disney one. So we're really only talking about the Disney one. We're talking about the movie.
Yeah.
The dad, you know, whatever it is, if he represents like the settling, the order of society, like it's ordered, it's settled. He's benevolent.
Yeah.
He gives her a puppy. You know, you just see it in that opening sort of like vignette as it like kind of tracks in on that, you know, beautiful matte painting and everything. And then that balanced idea of marriage, of like a well-fitted, wholesome, you know, well-balanced marriage is sundered. And then he brings in this other element. And so this other element comes in with like this sort of queen bee thing, right? So
and then it comes in as the stepmother in, like, you know, all the modern Mean Girl stories. It's just the queen bee, it's the cool girl at school, but it's the same process. It's the same thing that's going on. You have your ringleader and the one person who's specifically targeting Cinderella in this one, and, you know, she makes friends with the quirky weird kids. In this one it's the animals, and she's also better and more competent at everything she does than everyone else, and that's kind of why she rises up above everyone. But certainly being picked on and cast aside and having to overcome that is the whole story here.
And so her conflict is with the reputation destruction, like social alienation. Like this is it's amazing. It totally reminds me of just high school girls on Instagram. Only they didn't have Instagram in, you know, whatever.
But like she's about to go to the ball. She comes down with her mom's dress, and they're like, hell no. They rip it up, and they you know, cast her aside, and they're like, you know, they make sure an accident happens, so she just happens to miss it. It's Mean Girls.
Yeah, and to take her and tear her down her status, that like we don't know her real name. You know, we never do find out her real name. I don't think we even know it in Grimm's fairy tale, like, because her reputation is so destroyed that like forever her name is Cinderella because she's in the cinders.
But that's not her actual name. That's I don't know.
It's an epithet that they brand her with because she sleeps on the hearth, like amongst
it's an insult. It's, oh, she's Cinderella.
So it's total reputation destruction. She's been annihilated by these sisters, by the stepmother, and then so that seems pretty obvious. Like that's Mean Girls, and that is totally, I mean, completely relevant today. Anyone with like a daughter, like, or anyone who works with middle schoolers or youth or anything, it's like you can just see it. So great. So Cinderella, clearly relevant still. And then the Bachelor,
two of the biggest franchises that people are drawn to watching now, and is getting retold on Broadway and different places. And then The Bachelor, they keep doing all sorts of different versions of that. Like, we keep watching them. People keep flocking to watching these things. Like, we've been telling that story since Grimm fairy tale days. So,
and clearly telling it because we're observing it and living it. And so there's something really, really true and continuous about it. So, okay, so cool. So that, so it's obviously relevant. And then the theory, and I'm going to try to revisit this one and refine it as we go, because I think it's valuable. I think this goes all the way to what I'm guessing is going to be some heretical Christian doctrine. If I can like just bust some out, why not? Like, let's go for it. But is this idea, like, I remember a conversation, I forget which forum it was in, but it was talking about that, you know, in the Judeo-Christian sort of Western canon, there is a shortage of like the divine feminine portrayal. And I went, well, except for humanity. Like when you go through Jewish texts, and then you go through, you know, New Covenant Christian texts, Israel is frequently referred to as, you know, the bride or the unfaithful bride or consort, right? So there's this idea of the the people themselves in relation to God are feminine. Mm-hmm. And so the patriarchy is actually a female. And so and the church, like the new era Christian church, which just means like gathering, it just means like coming together of the people, not a building, but like a movement, is the bride. There's this parable about, the wedding night that Jesus tells about, like he's going to come, and some of the bridesmaids have lantern oil and some don't, right? And so that's just one of many instances where the church is referred to as the bride of the Christ. And so what I suggest is that this is part of, like, this is, and we see in Cinderella and in Snow White and in Sleeping Beauty, we see elements of, and there are other things in Cinderella and Snow White and Sleeping Beauty, but in Cinderella especially, there is this archetype of like the readying of the divine bride.
But and the readying of her, it happens not from, like, she's not formally trained in that. It happens from kind of being cast to the side and being the one who's got to, through being bullied, through having to be the one to do all the work around the house, and also, like, it turns out she becomes very good at that. She can sing better than her sister. She can, just by living her life and overcoming the hardships, is how she becomes equipped.
Yeah. And the parallels with that, and I think, like, the call, like, if I'm gonna, so here's the other thing, like when you watch Cinderella, or when I watch Cinderella, I don't sit back and go like, this is about some girl, like only girls can watch this movie. Like, you watch the movie, like you watch any movie. You watch the movie and you're like, I'm Cinderella. Like, you're not just sitting there waiting like, oh, well, since there's only one male character and it's the dad and he's dead, I guess I'm dead when I watch this movie. Like, no, I'm Cinderella. Like, how am I like her? Yes. How are forces arrayed against me in my life? Like, who are the mean girls or the mean boys in my life? And what is the prize I'm pursuing? And so that's how you watch any story, right? Like, I'm Cinderella. And so like, I'm not sitting there going like, I'm the dumb fat mouse. Like, that's probably more like reality. But like, I'm watching Cinderella and I'm thinking, okay, the same calling on my life. So in the movie, she's what's called like a catalyst protagonist, right? Like Forrest Gump or like Clint Eastwood in every Western movie. Like, she has no arc. Like, she doesn't learn anything in this movie, but she changes the world around her. And like, same with Forrest Gump. Like, he has no arc.
He doesn't, because there's not a ton of, like, it's not a hero's journey in that Cinderella is not a different person at the end of it than she was. She's just things happen to her, and then she shows up and brings her competency in magic and beauty, and then that kind of shifts things around her. But she's kind of discovering who she is, but it's not changing who she is.
And so the call on, like, let's say the bride of Christ is to, like, remain and endure and to be sort of like forged, right? And so it's the world and the tribulations around us, and it's by keeping like our sort of a single-minded focus on like walking in the way, which is what Cinderella does,
right?
Is that you endure, and then you pass the test, as it were. Like, not that it's a test set before you, but you, like, endure the trial, and on the other side is the reunion, and all creation becomes rebalanced by the state that she was in at the beginning, where father and mother were in this harmonious, husband and wife were in this harmonious thing, is broken. Brokenness enters into her world. She endures on the path that was set before her when things were ordered, and then returns to that place of order when she now fills in the space for the deceased, right? The lost bride, and then restores this order into her paradise. And
she's a faithful character in that, despite all the bullshit she has to put up with, she's still showing up. She doesn't like get resentful. She doesn't give middle fingers to the world. She doesn't get even. She's not trying to, like, get one up on her stepsisters or rub it in
Right.
their face. She's like, I'm just trying to go to the ball. I'm just trying,
Yeah.
like, I'm just following the path that of what I'm supposed to do. And you get the sense, I think, in life as well as in this story. It's like, yeah, the her star is diminished if she does try to get even.
Right.
Um, and
Yeah.
so that's that
Yeah.
enduring that she's doing. It's even despite all the things that are getting thrown her way and being completely betrayed by her stepmother, who's supposed to be the one to take care of her, and she's like she just totally casts her to the side. Like that's why she stands out to the prince, because she has risen above all that.
Yeah. I mean, and it manifests in her like posture, right? So we see her, she's carrying the dishes
Hmm.
up, from the cellar, and
Yeah,
she's doing the princess thing where she's
yeah,
balancing, and has this
yeah,
perfect
yeah,
poise and posture. And even between, in the way that she sets order to
yeah,
like creation, like when
right,
she encounters nature and the dog and the cat are fighting,
yeah,
and and she even instills in the dog like, you mustn't get even,
yeah, yeah,
you still have to obey the rules, right? So we see that she practices
yeah.
and
So
spreads into the creative order what she lives by.
So why is that, do you think people are so reactive to the, like, all right, perfectly balancing, she's doing the princess thing. Why is it that seems like a more modern thing now, but like even before, like why does that piss people off?
Hmm.
Is it that it's an archetypal standard we can't measure up to? It's like, okay, gosh, that's just the perfect thing. I just have to fit into that box. It's like, yeah, it's a standard.
Yeah,
It's an archetype.
yeah, it's a standard, and I think there's been a movement to push against standards,
Right.
and then this whole idea of like not feeling shame,
Hmm.
that shame is always bad. And it's funny because I was just reading, I think it was in The Problem of Pain, and the author C.S. Lewis is talking about the utility of shame, and that it's there to uh, nudge you. It's there to juxtapose what with glorification,
Yeah.
and so it's funny. There's like all these fights going on about like, should female video game characters be beautiful, and there's like this move to like make them not beautiful, and it's like, well, why? You know, um, just for the sake of like what, not wanting to let people look on beauty, or that we should tear down this idea of beauty. And
Well, for me, it's like once you're doing that, you're asking the wrong question. Like,
right.
what's the character model that fits best for the game? What fits best for the story? What fits best for what we're trying to do, right? Like,
Yeah.
because it almost goes
Yeah.
the opposite way if it just like over sexualized everything, which now it's
Sure.
like that's not even like a character. That's just like
Well, and I would say that's not even beauty, that's
that's
something
what I'm saying,
else.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's you're not the something being beautiful or idealized is
Hmm.
we're weird about it now. Like,
Yeah, and even being in Rome and looking at all the classical art and
yeah,
classical work, uh, and people go like, oh, a long time ago, like Rubenesque women were beautiful, and it's like, yeah, and they also didn't exist back then. Like
right.
there has always, you look at a statue of, you look at David, you look at
Yeah,
Michelangelo's David, you're like, no
yeah,
guy looks like
yeah.
that. That's also
That's
an
the point.
ideal,
Right.
and the point of ideals is to be unattainable. And
Mhm.
so the point of, so it's like, oh, I slouch and drop shit, and I'm clumsy, and and I'm
I'm
sloppy.
never gonna be as
I'm never going
graceful
to be with
as
Cinderella.
Cinderella.
And do you have
Yeah,
to
that's the
be
point.
that to be loved? No, but wouldn't it help?
Well,
Like,
but the idea, like, I shouldn't strive for that. Like, you're not gonna hit it. Like, you
yeah,
won't.
yeah,
Like, no one will. That's
right,
the point. But like, it's
exactly.
worth striving for.
It's an ideal
It's an ideal,
for a
and
point.
it's like,
It is worth
I mean,
striving for.
the same way, like even the prince, like knight in shining armor, like royalty, just
Yeah,
he does everything perfectly and shows up
yeah,
and looks how he looks. Like, not super developed in this movie, but like it's an ideal. You're not gonna hit it, and I mean, different movie, but Beauty and the Beast is ultimately about we're trying to become these ideals and these archetypes that like creates beauty for the kingdom and the world around us, right? And that's
yeah.
what's happening here, right? So
yeah.
We get reactive around that, but like I think it's a bummer when I hear people do that because it's like you're missing out on like the good stuff that's actually very relatable around that.
And it's also disingenuous because anyone who says that has some kind of idealized standard. It's just different, and so they're hearkening to that one instead of the one being presented.
Yeah.
Or they've erased value entirely. And if you erase value entirely, then you actually don't have any leg to stand on to attack value.
Yeah.
Because if there is no value, then it just might as well be poise and elegance as naturalness or whatever the hell you want to present as an ideal. Right. And so it's inherently an attack from nothing on nothing, unless you recognize that there are such things as ideals, in which case, who could even argue?
Right.
Right. And so the other thing about Cinderella in this idea of divine bride is we see her. It's funny. This is also in The Problem with Pain. We see her take a wild mouse. It's been caught in a trap.
Yeah.
And we see her like endow it with humanity. Yeah. It like becomes sentient before our eyes.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
And here you go. Here's clothes and a name. Like she even, like Adam, names the creature. Yeah. And then Gus becomes Gus. And now that's him.
And now he's this goofy, stupid character that we all laugh at and have fun with.
Yeah. And ultimately saves her.
Yeah.
Because they bring the key to release her ultimately. Right. And so as she redeems creation, again, the same way, like the redeemed Adam will be placed, the redeemed bride of Christ, called Adam, but as a female, in terms of our relation to the divine masculine, we redeem creation.
Right.
We and it comes along for the ride in our redemption.
Yeah.
And so,
well, it's interesting in the story too, because you see the way the animals react to her. They love her. They want to help her. They want to serve her while she's also serving them. And they hate the stepsisters. They loathe and despise them. And then the way Cinderella lives in harmony with nature is, again, part of what makes her be a force that puts order to everything, that makes it all kind of work, versus their stepsisters just want to crush it and tear it down, and life gets dull and drab, and they're not attractive as a result.
And even what you said about harmony, like there's this great part where the sisters are attempting to harmonize, as they're singing the Nightingale song, and we see that they have conflict. Right, like nothing about them is harmonious. They're discordant. They can't sing, and they bicker. And then she alone, not only as she sings, not only is she a beautiful singer, but then the
nature starts harmonizing.
Her virtue, her virtue proliferates and multiplies. And then she harmonizes with herself. In a way, like her reflection in nature. Creates this multiplicity of harmony.
And even while she's doing her chores, she's cleaning the floor at that point, right? There's a effortlessness to it, but like what I took from it is just it's a genuine thing. It's just genuinely coming out of her. Whereas stepsisters we're trying to perform. We are doing this song. We are going to be beautiful girls who are singing this song, and everyone's going to love us as a result. And if you're trying to do that, it's not going to. It's ugly.
Yeah, it's almost the difference between like the influencer trying to be beautiful for likes versus someone who is just enjoying beauty because beauty is a virtue.
It's one direction. You don't know you're beautiful, Micah.
That's right. Yeah. I feel like you are. And that's something that we should work on.
Right, exactly. I need to stop knowing that and trying to think that, right? But again, I know it's all those examples just come to me of like, oh yeah, there's that modern pop song that like we're singing. It's like that theme was there even in Cinderella 40 years, 70 years ago.
Yeah. Okay, so there's one place in the whole movie where she expresses like irritability. Do you remember what it is by any chance?
watched it like a week and a half ago.
Yeah.
When she's locked away or early on.
No, like
Oh no, it's
just
early on. It's at the very beginning.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. You remember what it is?
Where she's getting up, she's annoyed with the cat.
No, no.
She's annoyed with one of the animals. She's getting ready. Oh, it's
She
the
wakes
bells.
up.
It's the
It's the
bells.
bells on the clock.
The bells
right?
on the clock.
And so,
Yeah.
like
that darn clock.
So there's obviously, I think it's foreshadowing that the clock is what's going to undo her little miracle, right? Like, so we're already setting up. I mean, so some of that is Chekhov's gun. Like, if the clock is going to show up later, you got to have the clock at the very beginning, which is just good storytelling. But also, there's something about time. Time is always the enemy of, let's say, youth, beauty. Time is also the thing that you're subject to when the call on your life is to endure.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, running a super marathon, although that's distance and not time, but it's still time space, right? It's like watching a kid sit there and not eat the marshmallow, or sitting in class waiting for the bell. Like, time is the enemy of youth, and time is also the enemy of endurance. It is actually the trial of endurance. There's, Tony Horton working out where he's like, we're going to do this thing for 30 seconds. You can do anything for 30 seconds. I was like, yeah, sure. But not for like 30 hours.
Ultimately, her journey is one of patience and endurance.
Yeah.
Which is, that's interesting because, like, at midnight, when the clock strikes midnight, you're going to turn back into a pumpkin. Like, the fantasy is going to be over. And so it is kind of this race against the clock thing that's happening. But at the end she kind of overcomes that. Like, even despite going back to the fantasy night she had is over, then her character is still what endures beyond that.
And what she does that I noticed on this last watching, mostly because I knew we were going to talk about it, so I paid more attention, wasn't on my phone the whole time. When her fantasy is over, instead of going, oh, for this 1 minute I had what I deserve, or for this 1 minute I was actually happy, any of that, she just goes, wasn't that a wonderful time? Like, so she has gratitude. And so even in this minute of having everything that she's never even knew that she wanted ripped away from her, which is probably the ultimate test, really. She responds with gratitude and goes, I'm just going to keep this one slipper. Because wasn't it wonderful? And her gratitude and keeping that slipper winds up being the thing that overcomes her enemy.
The other slipper's broken. Okay, I got it. I had this gratitude.
I have the other one.
And that's
I have it right here. And
that slipper she holds on to, symbolizing her gratitude for that moment, as opposed to the addictive, I want to get back and recreate that fantasy and get another hit, chase the dragon on that one, which is, I would say, the alternative response.
She doesn't curse the clock. So if she does have an arc, that might be it. But I think what it is more than anything is just a demonstration of, like, this is the final test of your character to see if you will be a catalyst protagonist or if you're going to crumble and just be another character. The way, like, so like in the the mythology or whatever you want to call it of the Gospels, of the Christ story, which is sort of like the model for most heroes' journeys, and or maybe it is one, depending on what you believe. But he's a catalyst protagonist. And he goes through the same thing where it's like, how many trials can we pit against you to see if you'll waver?
It's an endurance. It's the ultimate endurance story.
It's the ultimate endurance. Can you get to the end? And then he does. It's finished. And then Cinderella likewise goes into death. She gets locked away, right? But the tower, if you just invert it, the tower is just going into the depths, right? And so it's just a vertical, right? So she gets locked in there by the enemy. By redeeming nature and winning these allies through her virtue. She's released, and she comes back and she resurrects with the slipper.
So she goes into the depths, right? She can't do anything. She's powerless at that point, and it's up to that's the judgment. That's, hey, did you earn enough clout with the animals and with nature,
Right.
and with is nature going to come rescue you when you are there in the depths? Like, have you earned enough regard in that? And she passed that test.
Her servants, the ultimately, like what C.S. Lewis kind of talks about is that the natural order's, redemption and sentience, as it were, is dependent on its reflection of its sort of like its steward or its master. And so her virtue is so reflected in these little creatures that it brings her out of her captivity. And then she comes out and resurrects, and then happily ever after.
And even like the fact she has the slipper with her when the other one breaks, that's the symbol of her gratitude, which is like, oh yes, that is the one. She is the person the prince was with.
Yeah. And so the shattering of the slipper doesn't faze her at all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The comeuppance of the villains is something that we always want to reflect on. Hang on, I got my kid here. Maybe we're going to guess.
Good. Yeah, let's get his take.
Hey, I'm recording real quick. Can you come here and say into the mic what you think about Cinderella? Anyway.
I don't like Cinderella.
You don't like Cinderella?
It's a miss.
Why not? You got to come over. Why don't you like Cinderella?
Because they have girls in it.
All right, well, never mind.
Okay, yeah, so the villain comeuppance. What do we see in this one?
Well, so in this one, so what's interesting is, and maybe we can mention Grimm's fairy tales here, because the comeuppances are very different in the way they're portrayed in this one versus the other one. So it's interesting because we know that at this point in like sort of Disney continuum, they have no reluctance to just heinously, capitally punish villains because they've done it in previous movies at this point.
Right.
Like they'll crush a bitch with a rock. They won't hesitate. But so in this one, really, it's just they're subject to humiliation, right? Like, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I mean, they're revealed for the mean girls that they are.
There you go. That's
Cinderella elevates above you, and they're just like, okay, you're just a bunch of catty mean girls, and that is very unattractive, and they're left to become old maids, let's say.
So it's an unveiling. Yeah. And so that's kind of what it is everybody gets unveiled. Cinderella gets unveiled.
Yeah.
And what she looks like in the world is not what she looks like in, let's say, the spiritual world, where she's actually this wonderful saintly princess. And the wealthy aristocratic young girls get unveiled, and they're actually monsters.
Yeah.
We
were talking about how people like why are people so reactive to this princess ideal? I think it's because it does that. It reveals, it's an unveiling of like what the character is, and a lot of times we identify and we see more of ourselves in the stepsisters than we do Cinderella. Because
we don't like that.
It's like, I don't want to, am I the stepsister in the story? Like sometimes,
and there's something else nestled in that, which is this idea that, like, I know Americans certainly don't like, which is that like some people are better than others. Not that they should be more entitled with more like rights or opportunities than others.
Yeah.
But some people just really are better. Present a story where it's like Cinderella is obviously a better kind of person than the stepsisters and the stepmom.
Yeah.
Is like, that flies in the face of the sort of equity idea that, like, no, everybody, like, same outcomes, everybody gets an equal shot. And it's like, but they suck. Like, they're awful.
Yeah, but I think in there too, though, it's like the idealized outcome, like, if the stepsisters got the prince, they wouldn't last. It would be miserable. It'd be miserable for the prince. It'd be miserable for them. Everything goes in chaos, right? It's not helping them in that way, right? It's like, I guess it's kind of like Peterson's hierarchy thing. It's like, where do you fit in the hierarchy? That's where your place is. And if it's like, because like there's another side of it where like she goes off with Prince Charming, and we elevate that. Everyone is happy about this. This makes the kingdom better, and everyone applauds this because like this is good for everyone versus the resentment around why am I not the one who's
what's good for me. Right. And there's
Um,
also wondering, like I'm thinking of the backstory of the stepmother, that she's an inversion of Cinderella in that she does have poise.
oh, that's
like
good.
like she knows the virtues and she can recognize them. And she's the one who sees the princess at the ball and then sees Cinderella and goes, "Oh shit, that was Cinderella."
Right.
And so she, like in Dungeons and Dragons talk, like she would be lawful evil, where it's like, she knows the rules, she knows the standards, and very intentionally wants to go, "I'm going to use these for me."
She got her prince, Cinderella's father, by entrapping him, essentially, not by earning his love and becoming like gracefully like winning him over and like creating wholeness to his family that was broken. It was like, oh, this is a guy, and we haven't gotten too much into Grimm's fairy tales, but it's a real dark version of it in that one, where she entraps him and the family and all that. So it's like that is kind of the story of what would happen if the stepsisters successfully manipulate their way into Prince Charming's good graces. It's like, okay, well, you're gonna what it produces is the stepsisters. It produces these angry, mean sisters who want to tear everything down.
And they want to create a fabrication of virtue in order to get the rewards of virtue without actually going through the labors that it takes to actually manifest the virtue.
They want to be seen as the most beautiful girl at the ball, not actually go through the steps it takes to attain that beauty.
And because they want the goods.
Yeah. I mean, and it's and that's what everyone reacts to when they watch The Bachelor. She just looks pretty. She puts on the makeup. She has big fake boobs. She puts on the look and the swimsuit and all that, but she's not here for the right reason. She's here because she's trying to like just get famous for herself. Like,
we're still playing out Cinderella and stepsisters. So it is worth mentioning with this idea of like the revelation, using that word intentionally, for how it manifests in the biblical corpus. The revelation at the end, where we see the whole time Princess was beautiful, and the whole time, or Cinderella was beautiful, and she's actually royalty, or at least has the virtues of royalty. And the stepsisters, who are the wealthy aristocrats, are actually monsters. In the Grimm's fairy tales, their comeuppance is they self-mutilate. In order to continue this, this subterfuge that's going to bring them the goods to get
which
them
is they cut their toes off to fit into the slippers.
One of them chops her toe off and the other one chops her heel off. And so you don't need to be a podiatrist to know that like that's going to change like your poise, all those things that you might like, it's going to ruin it for the rest of your life. So
but it's again like mutilating your body to fit beauty standards is like, we don't see that anymore, right? Like,
no one does that.
That's crazy Grimm's fairy tale thing, right?
Who would dream of undergoing surgery to
in the 1600s or whenever these stories were written? They were already it was that theme was already there. It's nothing new.
That's right. And so then they push their subterfuge to the point that it becomes painfully obvious and destroys itself, which we see with cosmetic surgery all the time. Like it was an act that we were all going to kind of go along with to a certain point, and now like you've done whatever to your face, your body, or your whatever, where it's like now you've gone too far and you're permanently crippled. And then they're forced to attend the wedding as bridesmaids.
This is in the Grimm's fairy tale stories.
Limping. And as they're limping alongside as the bridesmaids, these birds that in the Grimm's fairy tale, it's not mice, it's birds that like attend to her. They peck out the eyes of the girls. And so they each peck out one eye walking this way, and then the other eye walking back the other way down the aisle, right? It's so brutal. And so, so they're also slowly, meticulously blinded through the procession of the uniting of the divine bride with the divine groom.
It's the revealing of the character that's actually there, and it's devastating to look at because, like, despite all their best efforts to be the ones who are marrying that prince, like, all their efforts got them was limping down and then being blinded by their own inadequacies, ultimately is what that is.
Yeah. And so it's the ultimate revelation of, like, they cannot see because they could not see the virtue in Cinderella to emulate instead of demonize.
Yeah.
And they're mutilated cripples.
Yeah.
So and so that's the comeuppance of the villain in the Grimm version. And then in the Disney version, it's still enough because we're so swept up in, you know, the rapture of the uniting of the bride and the groom. And,
right.
Yeah. And so, okay. So
that was good, man.
So Cinderella, still relevant, obviously.
Yep.
The animation, it's beautiful.
Yep.
The music is kind of sparse, but it's present.
Yeah, it's got that very kind of 50s big orchestra with, like, choir singing, like,
like an operatic vocal performance, and the plot, you know, the story itself, like the movie itself, it's like 50% those mice screwing around, but it's cute, and the mice are likable, and they're funny, and so, like, still relevant. Put it on for the kids anytime, and generally, if it's on, I'll sit down and watch it because it's a really beautifully made film.
It's not such a story arc that, like, if you miss the beginning, you're like, you can jump in at any point in the movie. It's like, all right, we're doing the ball now, or we're doing the fairy godmother turns the pumpkin into a carriage, and the fantasy begins. Like, there's lots of kind of standalone parts that are easy to slide into.
Yeah, and you know, last weekend, because we take turns getting to pick the movie. So last weekend, Calvin, who we met, picked Spirited Away for his movie.
Oh, nice.
Which is all girls as well. So obviously he's talking out of his ass about whatever Mila told him. But Spirited Away is also, among many other myths present in that movie, is also Cinderella. Which someday we'll get around to Miyazaki and play with those movies too. But so any parting thoughts on this one?
My big takes were, like, we're still telling this story over and over again in a lot of different areas. The themes in these are very present. That you know, there's only a handful of, like, true princess stories, and I think this is one of them. That's why we wanted to get this one early, because I think it really encapsulates what, you know, like, the idea that princess is a huge part of just Disney's empire. And I think it's like, without these kind of core stories early on, like, it doesn't quite launch in the same way that it did. It's a good one.
My core takeaway is, we're still telling all these stories. I think it did set a trajectory. I mean, people still dress up as Cinderella when you go to Disneyland. There's like a million Cinderellas running around, and that the patriarchy is a princess. That's at the root of it all. That's
subversive, man. The patriarchy is a princess.
Yeah, the patriarchy is a princess, and Eric, you and I are Cinderella.
I'll take it. I'll strive to be more like Cinderella.
That's right.
Carry all the.
So should we all?
Balanced, right?
And then, so what's next? Our next one is
well, we were talking about doing Jungle Book, or we got a bunch on the table here. Maybe we'll do Jungle Book next.
Love it.
Cool.
All right, man.